Right. Right, I've started recording. Added to everyone else's recordings. People still joining.
So it's apparently the Gartner hype cycle.
Yes, that's right. Every consultant knows about it and uses it, abuses it. Okay, thanks for joining, everyone. I know the invitation talked about LEI and NEI registration, but actually the point behind this is expanding the range of aliases which we can use for merchant registration. That's the fundamental aspect from the point of view of the Mojo Foundation. So I wanted to just talk about these ideas today and really get the views of the community on whether this was something that we should be pursuing in part or in whole for future development work. I don't actually think there's a huge amount of development stuff required in this regard, but it does change the flavor, if you like, of potential deployments. So to be clear that we were all aligned on this. Can everyone see my screen before I go on?
No, we don't see any sharing yet.
No. Okay. Let's just share that. How's that?
Much better.
Pleased to hear it. Okay, so background. There's a lot of work that's gone on in the last PI and probably prior to that as well, and continuing now, where I can see a lot of synergies, and that leads me to think that there are things that we can do to extract greater value from them. So in particular, they extend. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on in merchant payments, and in particular the G2P MOSIP-based payments routing, and potentially also in the multi-scheme deployments workstream. And we can use those synergies, if you like, to extend merchant payments cross-border and to include casual merchants, market traders, etc., rather than just doing simple merchant registration. So how can we extend it to introduce other forms of identity which make it more inclusive, which means more merchants might actually register to use? And so at the moment, as we deployed merchant registration or have developed merchant registration, the merchant registry enforces unique merchant IDs. Merchant IDs are only unique within a deployment. I should say actually that next week's product counselor is the merchant payments workstream doing a demonstration, and Kareem is he on the call? No, okay, I'll speak for him then. Kareem has promised to do a demo of merchant registration and merchant payment and show us a QR code, actually do it on a live Mojo Loop deployment. So I think that is definitely worth coming along to see. So cross-border implies the potential for collision of merchant IDs in that case. So there's a number of things that we can do around that. One is to extend merchant IDs to include a country or scheme prefix on a merchant ID. And another might be to use merchant IDs that are intrinsically worldwide unique. And an obvious one that we've been talking about for a number of months now is the logical entity identifiers, the LEIs, which are administered by Glyph. And there is, Julie and I have been talking to Glyph for a while now, and we think there's an opportunity for partnership with Glyph in extending LEI usage and capitalizing on it for Mojo Loop. And also, I don't know if this is still an opportunity, but we did talk about for a long time in the multi-scheme workstream about lazy discovery of aliases. And if that's still something, I think that might have been downplayed now somewhat by that work stream, but if it's possible, we could capitalize on that for merchant payments. Please feel free to jump in whenever you wish. I'm not wanting to just deliver a sermon
Sorry.
here.
Shall I add on the lazy discovery side, insofar as that means basically only asking DFSPs for their information when an identifier is requested, then we have moved away from that, and we're now planning to do the local oracles in the way they're done now. However, we will be, I think our current model says we won't be passing those oracles forward across the whole of an inter-scheme.
No, we did agree on that, certainly.
Yep.
Yeah. So that means
that basically means there will be, for instance, a merchant ID oracle for any scheme that implements merchant IDs. And when another scheme asks for an ID in that oracle, then the association will be stored in the scheme that asked for it, and indeed in any intermediate schemes as well.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly workable from my perspective. Yes, it's the question then becomes how you identify that source oracle. And do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
We've discussed this a number of times, but in my recollection, without arriving at a very satisfactory improvement on the round robin idea.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I thought I might have missed something. Good. That was my understanding as well. Okay, good. Well, we can address that separately. It's not relevant to today. So we then talked about tiers of merchant, and we're only talking about face-to-face transactions and not talking about internet purchase or whatever. It's purely face-to-face. So I always talk about 4 tiers of merchants. One is the tier 1 merchants, which is the international multi-outlet merchants. And the 2 examples I listed here were Starbucks and ShopRite, which obviously are large merchants with a big footprint across countries. Tier 2 is the national multi-outlet merchants, and the one that came to mind for me was Java House in Kenya. They don't have a footprint outside Kenya. They're pretty commonplace across Kenya. Then tier 3 is local stores, probably 1 outlet, could be 2 or more, and some with a single owner operator, but others where it's actually a formal business. And then tier 4 is the casual merchants, stall holders, the kiosks, etc., where it's definitely one individual who is responsible for all aspects of that business. Would anyone disagree with those classifications? No. Okay. So long. Then we're talking about whether these tiers are registered as businesses. And tier 1 and tier 2, I think it's quite clear they are registered as formal businesses in each country in which they operate. And the tier 4 is very much a sole trader, where they're not registered as a formal business, they're entirely casual. Tier 3, I think, is the crossover, where it might be one or the other. So that affects the type of ID that we might be able to use. So the obvious one that we have now is the merchant ID, which is as adopted by the merchant payments workstream. It's scheme specific. It has limited usability across border, but crucially, it supports both USSD and QR, usable for either. The logical entity identifier is long. It's 20 digits, and most importantly, it's alphanumeric. It does have the value of being unique worldwide, and Leaf, who are responsible, I never know this Leaf of Life, who are responsible for its administration, provide an API where you can look up an LEI. It'll tell you which country it's from, etc., which could be useful for our purposes. It's only useful for larger businesses, and as things stand now, it is weak in that it is predominantly used in the financial sector in North America and Europe. It doesn't have a great deal of reach beyond that. And if you look at the number of LEIs in Rwanda, for example, last time I checked, I think it was 16, and they tended to be governments and NGOs. It's not usable for USSD. It could only be used to embed it in a QR code for payments. So the LEI looks at first sight as it has great potential, but there's a long way to go to make it worthwhile, to be honest.
And presumably QR means smartphones only.
Precisely. Smartphones for customers, but not for merchants, because you can actually just print the QR.
Sure.
Which has potential for fraud in itself. Address that separate.
Yeah, but the QR codes, presumably, nobody who's using USSD will be using a smartphone.
No, indeed. So one of the things I'm suggesting is that we actually need to address both. We need a solution for QR codes, which is potentially more secure, but we need to be able to support USSD as well, which is less usable, but it is inclusive. I certainly don't want to suggest that we no longer are going to use USSDs. Aranje?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I see it differently, not as much as how much of it is in circulation and how, all of these sort of things, but more in its potential. So a few things sort of to consider. One is the LEI would be not the would be a great thing to use as the backend identifier. Think of it as an IP address.
Yeah.
And the merchant ID is essentially the domain name.
Yeah.
So that would be one thing. So then it's not a question of whether it's usable for USSD or whatnot, because you'd solve for that.
Both. You need both, in my view.
No, basically, you would marry a merchant ID to a LEI.
But only in those cases where an LEI is actually relevant for the entity.
So where you need it. So in your previous thing, the tier 4 would all be merchant IDs.
Yeah.
And tiers 1 and 2 would be LEIs with a companion merchant ID, and tier 3 could be a mix of the two.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying this is that like I have kind of one of these ideas that the modular deployment in a country becomes a validating agent for the LEIs. And
you're running ahead of me, Aranje.
Okay, cool.
Yes. That's pretty much exactly what I'm about to propose.
Okay, excellent.
So, yeah. Moving on, we'll come back to that in a moment. The natural entity identifier is something like and yes, I don't know why I'd written logical entity identifier is legal entity identifier. Yeah, sorry, apologize for that confusion. Natural entity identifier is something like a national identity scheme, and it might one of the ways you might implement a national identity scheme is something like MOSIP, which is, as we all know, the open source software which allows you to deploy a natural entity identifier. It can be unique worldwide if it has a country identifier, and is most useful for sole traders. It's not relevant to larger businesses. So there's the way it's working in my head is legal entity identifier plus merchant ID or natural entity identifier plus merchant ID, depending on the nature of the business. Yeah, so yeah, LEI potentially for domestic and internal QR, which adds extra validation capabilities if you choose to, and LEI or NEI for domestic and internal for tier 3. And again, all of them still, we need merchant ID for domestic USSD. I wanted to show you a process flow. Do that. This is a sort of a draft. So excuse this. I know it's far too small to see. But this is a process flow that I've been developing, and I've explored it with Life, and I expect to again. To give you an overview, this is about the registration process, nothing to do with the operational use. Whilst here we have the merchant activity. Here we have the LEI validation agent, which Aranjay was just introducing. An LEI validation agent carries out registration of merchants and what we are thinking of as a merchant registrar in the or an acquiring acquiring DFSB in the merge loop world could act as an LEI validation agent, effectively capturing LEI merchant information on behalf of Life, and work not acting in any official role as in validating the data, not taking on that responsibility. That remains the responsibility of the LEI registrar down at the bottom. So merely validating or doing sense check of information and submitting it to the registrar for actual registration. So there are two aspects to this that I should highlight.
Paul, do you mind making it full screen?
Yes, I'm going to zoom in a bit here. So we zoom in. Go here. I was just giving sort of context overall here. So the important thing here is the registering agent, which is in Life terms the LEI validation agent. So the LEI validation agent captures documentation from the merchant, including any company registration data and LEI, then carrying out basic registration data checks and creating a scheme registry entry. This is our merchant registry. Checking if it's a registered company. If no, then do sole trader registration. If yes, then do company registration. We'll do that first. Verify company registration details by going to the national companies database. Check that it's valid and matches supplier details. If no, reset, check the whole thing out. If yes, generate a scheme-specific merchant ID and store it on our merchant registry. Check if an LEI has been presented. If it has, then submit all of our merchant data that we've collected to Life. Life want to do their own update of their own data based on our registration process. So using the LEI, score the registered data against what we supplied. If the score suggests it's the right company, update their LEI registry data with any identified changes, and then return a score plus any additional data that they hold on the company. Go back to the validation agent. If the score is okay, then add any additional data from the LEI to the registry, or merchant registry, and registration, including LEI complete, inform the merchant. So that's adding value to Life. They are able to do an update of the data that they hold on a company, which may be out of date. So we capture the new data. So that's where we bring value to Life. So if an LEI hasn't been presented, I'm asking this question and I don't know if it's the correct question. Does the business wish to trade cross-border or at least register for an LEI? If they do, gather any additional data for LEI registration and cross-reference with the company registration data from the national database, validate the submitted data, and crucially, request payment from the merchant, and later forward some percentage of the payment to the LEI registrar. So this is where the registering agent can actually, the validation agent actually make some money. If the payment is received, submit the data to the LEI registrar, and this is a new registration for Glyph. Validate this submitted data, register the company, generate an LEI, issue the LEI, and inform the registration agent, validation agent, I should say. Now that's of massive value to Glyph because, as I've already pointed out, they have very low coverage in the countries that we are interested in. So this allows them to extend their registration base and their relevance way beyond what they currently have. So they are willing to pay a percentage of the registration funds to the validating agent. And LEI registration complete. If it's successful, add the LEI to the scheme merchant registration, and that's complete. Now, this is very rough. It needs more thinking. The purpose of today is actually to socialize it with all of you here and to gather your views on this. Aranjay, is your hand up in you, or is it still from before? No. Okay. So this is at least in part about the partnership with Glyph. So we're carrying out the capture of merchant documentation, cross-referencing with national companies registration database, issuing merchant IDs. If an LEI exists, forward the data to Glyph to let them potentially update their own records. I don't think there's a charging opportunity there because we're not getting income from the merchant at that point. If there's a new registration for LEI, then that is a charging opportunity. Chargeable functions are charged to the merchant, and acquirer forwards fee less the commission to Glyph. Now there's an opportunity there for us to raise our profile further by this partnership with Glyph, and Glyph is possibly not the only one. Julie's talking about UTC as well as another option. Maybe this is a way of formalizing our presence in this space. International transactions currently only enabled via QR in this particular flow, either LEI or NEI encoded. So we need an approach to define USSD friendly merchant IDs that are also uniquely linkable back to a merchant in another country. And that is the challenge that I think that we still have outstanding. That's all I wanted to say. I want to I suppose open it to the floor, get feedback on this, see whether it's worth pursuing. Any comments from anyone? Aranjay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think this makes a ton of sense for a couple of reasons. And what I'm saying is also every participant on Mojaloop should have an LEI, and that should be the identifier in the Mojaloop system, because then it just really permeates through. So not just merchant payments, but also all of the FIs, participating FIs.
Do you think that makes sense for the tier 4 merchants, casual traders?
So tier 4, unlikely they would be able to get a LEI because the requirements are quite significant.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, no, I was talking about the FIs participating on Mojo.
Yes, I agree with you. They should definitely have an LEI. Yeah.
Right. And then but and it can get further cascaded through them to sign up as they sign up more business customers. But ideally, the where I'm coming from with this is that if you say after a certain limit on a volume transaction, that a business has to have a LEI, So, for example, in India, it's like $25,000. You become liable for GST, which is the general sales tax, and that's a threshold that means you're now moving from tier 4 to tier 3.
Exactly.
And so you need to now be registered and blah 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 blah. But by then getting an LEI for them, that's going to really help in the long run on the compliance side of life.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
That was the original impetus for this, to help on the compliance side for those international transactions. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So building it in to the scheme, so that you get that wide coverage, would really kind of streamline everything, so that when because you can't sort of doing it later is going to be much more painful, right?
Yeah.
So that's and I mean currently it's like $50 to get an LEI, but their vision is to bring it down to 50. Okay, well, yeah, but the vision is to bring it down to $2. So
they can only do that if they achieve scale. So this is the kind of approach that would help with that, and that's why they are interested in collaborating with us on this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So so there are a lot of synergies in that regard. But the biggest one, I think, to look at it is what I was saying about this IP address and domain. So if you think about the LEI as the IP address, and IPv6, which is really complicated, no? And
yes, it is. That's one way of looking at it, certainly.
Because then it really makes it much more usable, because you have a companion identifier that's a lot simpler, essentially a proxy or alias.
I don't know that analogy is entirely accurate, because the point about having a name and an IP address is that the IP address may change as a resolution of that name, whereas the actually totally unique stuff is entirely reversed in this case. The LEI and the NEI are the immutable items.
Agreed. But let's assume Google.com has a dedicated IP that doesn't change. It's going to be the IP address for Google. The thing is that if we had to use the IP address every time we wanted to go to Google versus Google.com,
I agree with that. That's entirely why I've suggested it should only be machine readable.
Yeah,
in this context.
Exactly. Yeah, correct. So, I think that's how I think it would make a lot of sense. And if we reframe it that way, then we can look at it with a different lens. And the criteria, like the fact that it's not supported by USSD, wouldn't even matter. And we can kind of, I think it would add a lot of value to the ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think LEIs, as you said, LEIs and NEIs are actually very important from a compliance perspective. If we can get sufficient coverage. So this is just about trying to put the infrastructure in place to support that if and when it happens. LEIs are nowhere near as common as they need to be. Even in Europe, they're not as common as they should be. Most companies do not have them. I happened, as part of this process, I went and registered for an LEI, and it was a surprisingly easy process. But it did cost me $64. But I had an LEI within seconds, well, within a couple of minutes anyway. And
interesting. And you did that in the UK?
Yeah.
And they charged you in dollars. Okay.
Yeah. They charged me in dollars, and I got the full LEI registration was propagated out through their databases within 24 hours.
Yeah.
But
It
they
works
had,
very similarly to the DNS in that
yeah, very,
Clive holds a golden copy, but not the original data.
yes.
But to the issue here, I think in terms of needing an approach to define USSD friendly merchant IDs. So at the last convening, Michael had proposed what he called a TAP, the African Payment Network, which is essentially providing a merchant ID to every merchant along with whatever their existing ID was.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
I cannot tell a lie. I did say that.
Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that briefly?
Well, it's basically simply a question of expanding the uniqueness space
Mm-hmm.
and saying if you have an Africa-wide generator of unique merchant IDs, then those are already, how can I put this? They're already regional scheme ready because they're guaranteed to be unique across the whole space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's a simple idea, but
Yeah, so how I think it has a lot of potential, and how I would see it is that a merchant who's currently registered goes onto a portal, puts their local merchant ID, puts their acquirer, Airtel Money or whoever, and then the system would process it and give them a new merchant ID along with the other, and create like a A4 size PDF with both numbers in a very nice formatted thing, which they can print out, and they have now a new thing to stick there, which is their original till number and the TAP number, with logos and everything, all provided for them. So, and maybe even we can put a QR code on it, because basically that's a piece of paper that we decide what goes on it. So add a QR code for the TAP so that those with smartphones don't have to enter the number, and
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's explore that, because I think that could be well, depending on how it's structured, the best approach, but you need to perhaps explore it further. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sam, did you want to say something?
Paul, thank you. Yeah, two things I want to say. One was looking at it from a technical perspective. I think especially with regards to merchant IDs. So I like the strategy or thinking around using that for DFSPs, using the LEIs for DFSPs, because that solves the uniqueness problem there. But coming to merchants, my thinking is that this relates to identifiers in general, because we're talking about the set of payment IDs. So if this only seems to solve the problem for a limited identifiers if we consider the whole identifier space. So it seems to me that, let's say there is a particular market that we are solving this, or we're deploying this cross-border solution for a group of countries. I'm thinking that we'll solve the problem one way or another for identifiers in general, because we have to solve it for end users, like people.
Yeah.
And I don't see why that the same solution can be used for merchant IDs.
Explain what you mean a little more.
So if we are applying a solution that solves the uniqueness problem for user identifiers, let's say like national IDs or phone numbers even, that same problem should solve it for merchant IDs as well, is what I'm thinking. For DFSPs, I like using it, because I think it preemptively solves and already addresses some of the assumptions we're making in cross-border solution space. But for end users like merchant, for example, for technically speaking, it doesn't matter to us whether it's a merchant ID or it's an identifier of a user. I mean, the directories can be different, sure. But
Yeah.
if you're solving the uniqueness problem, I'm thinking it applies to both types of identifiers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know not to discourage its usage, but I don't see the value there. But DFSP is definitely. And the second one was in the flow that you mentioned. I would like to see if there is anything on the solution side that we need to alter to address this flow to support this, or if the solution that we have out of the box already caters for that. I know there's a lot of there are a lot of steps there that fall in the actual LEI space, but on the merge loop side, I'd like to see if there's anything that we need to tweak or alter to support this. Those are the two things. Thank you.
What are you thinking of in particular there, Sam? I'm sensing there's something at the back of your mind.
No, I'm not seeing anything that we need to do in Edition. I want to confirm that. Yeah,
Okay.
that feeling.
Okay, fine. Good.
I've got a thought on the merge loop. If you had a reference payment, maybe a globally unique payment for Africa, would we need to look up an internally supported payment address? Would we need to change the one for the other one so that we could the idea of having the domain versus the IP address? So we come up with a unique IP address which can reference every single organization in a unique, reliable way with some regulatory associated verified information. Then when we make a payment, we might want to make a much easier term so that people can use it. Do we maybe need to do some thinking there? So we have a lookup call that looks up from a centralized repository and then gets the payment token that then the sort of infrastructure can use to process that payment. The problem with the non-repudiation that we got at the moment is that if it is an end-to-end, which means when we do that end-to-end call, we can't change the message, which means everyone needs to be aware of that alias or that sort of easy to use reference token throughout the connection of interschemes, if we're thinking along those lines. Whereas if we had a sort of a centralized lookup to from the short one to the long one for each of the participants as they're making the call, that would then allow the infrastructure to only to really rely on the long IP address one and have an easy and initial mapping to that long address in a similar way that the internet works.
Yeah, we did discuss in earlier iterations the idea of having an equivalent of a DNS network or a single DNS server that could be used for that lookup process. I'm not against that idea if we think as a community that's the way forward, but it does introduce an extra requirement for a service that needs to be maintained.
So an LEI on a computer isn't that hard to type in, but on a USSD phone probably is.
USSD is impossible because it's alphanumeric. So USSD is only numeric. So it's impossible to use it.
I don't know, you're breaking up on me, or whether people are experiencing the same.
Yes, you were breaking
a little bit. Yes.
Am I still breaking up?
So Sam, that's
Can you hear me?
Not at the moment.
Oh, dear.
No, you're still breaking up.
Any better now?
Paul, what was Paul Baker?
Yes, Sam. Maybe that's the area where we could consider an extension. Sun merge loop. I don't, or at least have a method, a model for managing that.
Sure.
Maybe we don't need one. Maybe if we have a shared Oracle across multiple networks, but I think we should consider it.
Sort of an oracle, a single oracle across networks, or do you mean an oracle which points to oracles? As it were?
I think that the idea is the Oracle that if it can't find it, it then looks at a centralized Oracle for that
Yeah.
information.
No, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
How is the centralized Oracle maintained?
Well, that would need to be your reference site that takes that unique reference for Africa payment country payment identifier. It would need to be some sort of service along those lines would need to be maintained centrally during that registration process and made available.
Who would maintain that service then?
Did you say who would maintain that service?
Yes, because it's not the responsibility of any particular scheme operator, is it?
That's probably the question we need to answer.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I was hoping Aaron J would come up with a solution.
Sadly not,
Oh.
because I mean it's something that we did talk about a while ago. I can't remember when, and it fell down on the idea of, well, who's going to pay to operators?
In a limited scope, I think with solution, I don't know if we can speak freely here, but for a solution like Comesa, I think the reference scheme is well placed to do some of that. Maybe
Yes.
that is where we can start.
You mean the regional scheme?
The regional scheme, Comesa themselves could actually do it for the various country schemes. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That would make sense. But where there isn't that formal relationship, it's more difficult.
Sure. I mean, for any solution like this to work, there's got to be some organisation which sponsors a central registry.
Yeah, agreed. But is it? I think the most important point for me from today is it the view of this meeting that centralized service is the best way of doing this?
Oh, well, it's an attractive way of dealing with it because it's simple.
Yeah.
Well, it's technically simple, but organisationally difficult.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah,
RJ?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think so. I think, but I think it doesn't have to be centralized. There are many ways, or at least like the Glyph model, where the origination of the information is decentralized. All of the LEIs are held by the LOUs, which is the local operating entity units.
Yeah.
But so something like that model actually, to me, makes a lot of sense. And being able to find it, because ultimately, like, I do believe that we will have this globally, whether it's for the internet, whether it's before that, we'll see. But yeah, so I think you should work towards it.
Okay. So actually, you're talking, RJ, about a distributed model, not a centralized model at all.
Yeah, that's correct. Because centralized, I mean, in today's world,
I know.
especially if you want to do it across different regions, like it wouldn't make sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Can I say IBAN?
Sorry, say that again, Michael.
Can I say IBAN again?
Yeah. Oh dear. Yes.
I mean, it may be that the world will change and global identifiers of that kind will, I mean, sorry, because the distributed part of the glyph thing, as far as I can see it, is not a fundamental part of the model. It's just a technique for distribution.
Yeah.
But it does require some form of complete centralization. Now, as I say, it may be that the world will change and those sorts of things will really become global things, but I don't see any evidence at the moment that that's happening.
Is there an argument that the ALS service as currently implemented needs to be extended to essentially peer with other ALSs that it knows about to distribute this information in some way?
Yes, and in fact, I think I mean, we should test this out, but use like how the current ALS interacts with another adapter for a particular type or directory. I think that can apply while it interacts with another peer as well. Like essentially, we'll have a new Oracle which will interact with other lookup service from a different scheme.
Yes.
Julie, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Paul.
I think that's potentially an interesting area to be explored. Yeah. Julie, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think like I completely agree with what was said on the call, and I think for me like what probably is the best sort of implementation is like a permissioned decentralized network of this information, right? And I say permissioned, I think this is the case for Glide, where they onboard some of basically participants to give credit of the agent that are like, giving LEI and so on. I think that's one of my first thoughts. And the second one is actually like, could we be in the position where, and I know up until now our discussion have been, is it GLAF, is it UTC, is it another institution, but could we consume several sources of information potentially as well, so that like, we don't need to choose, right? And I feel that way, like, that give us like more coverage by not choosing.
Yeah. Why do we need to tie ourselves to one particular way of doing it? Indeed. Yes, I agree. If we can develop an architecture around that which is sufficiently flexible to support them all simultaneously, then why wouldn't you? Yes.
Part of the problem there, I think, is that that information would have to be channeled through end user applications. Essentially, the user has to put in something that they know about who they want to pay.
Yeah.
And if the applications that the user is using don't have the functionality to be flexible in relation to what kinds of information can be entered, then we're stymied. Aren't we?
I don't know. To be honest, I need to think about this.
Well, I mean, so there is, as far as I can see, there is no point of origin for an identifier except something that the end user knows. I mean, they must say something that says, here is the person, the entity that I want to pay.
Yes.
Now, if you walk into a coffee bar and it says, here's a merchant ID, that's no use to you at all if your application, if the end user application you're using doesn't allow you to enter a merchant ID.
Yes,
because
indeed.
it doesn't look like. I mean, yes, or It sounds dull and trivial, but it's an important point. I think,
Yes.
you know, we have to figure out when we are thinking about how this might work.
There needs to be a compatibility between the end user application and the wide variety of identifiers as a payment point.
Absolutely. And when we say the end user application, we actually mean the several hundred end user applications that will be in use in a regional scheme like COMESA.
Yes, and we have no control over those at all.
No, well, we do have some potentially.
We have influence.
Well, yeah. So what I mean is that COMESA and or the jurisdictions could say you must support XYZ identifiers.
Yes.
And that's certainly what
Yes.
Tanzania said about TIPS, for instance.
Yes, yes.
I agree with you, Michael. And to some point, like I think this is already an existing problem today, right?
Yeah.
Where effectively, like let's say, for example, I mean, I know it happens often on US website, right? That when you basically like want to enter your detail, you're confined to, let's say, a US number. So I think as we are progressing and the financial services industry is changing as well, and now like, you know, you can have a wallet address, you can have an account number, you can have a phone number. I feel like offering diversity of the IDs that you can put will become more and more a service or a feature that the FSP must offer. But perhaps we need to also, like, you know, find an international organization that push for this, right? Like an ISO type thing to some extent.
Okay, that needs more exploration. I don't think it's as straightforward as we are suggesting here, to be honest. I think there's potentially a lot of work there. Okay. Okay. Does anyone else have any other comment to make?
I just want to make a general comment, which is that we should not do anything that relies on the global acceptance of standards.
Indeed. Yes. There's plenty of precedent for there being many standards which are all incompatible.
And all global.
Yes. And all global as well. Yes. Quite agree with you, Michael.
So,
Okay,
I mean, I think,
good.
you know, if we're going to solve this well, we need to solve it in a federated way.
Yeah. Let me ask a more general question then. Is it worthwhile, in the view of this meeting, that we pursue partnerships with GLIFE, with other similar organizations, etc.? Is there value in that? Not to us, but to adopters?
In the markets that we are currently looking, I don't see that GLIFE is likely to be. I mean, I'm sorry. I take Arunje's point about DFSPs having GLIFE identifiers, which I think is an excellent one.
Yes, I agree.
But having merchants use GLIFE identifiers in, I mean, you know, unless we can disguise them in some way, just seems to me to be a non-starter.
I think, first of all, yes, I would think they would have to be hidden, disguised in some way. Yes, I completely agree. The advantage I see is that it presents a revenue earning opportunity to registering agents, essentially. And that's probably the only advantage to us at the moment. And we know that GLIFE are so keen to extend their reach that they are willing to pay probably not a huge amount of money to the registering agent to try and register as many merchants as possible to make them relevant, essentially. Which sounds a bit cynical.
Absolutely. Well, at $60 a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the business problem. You pay me $60 and suddenly you wind up with the government knocking on your door asking for tax.
Well, that's the downside. I mean, that's one reason why it'll never be usable by the tier 4 merchants. They'll never touch it in a million years. Tier 1 and
Oh,
tier
and
2, they already know the taxman very well. Aranjay?
Yeah, I don't see it so much as a revenue opportunity. I think we need to drive scale and reduce the cost. At
Yes, but
$60 a pop,
that's
it's
not
not,
at our
no one's going to
interest.
sign up for it.
No, that's not our interest in this, though, is it? Because we don't really care about the
Yeah, but
the growth
our
in LAI.
interest is in the AML, CFT side of life, the
Yes,
compliance thing.
indeed. Yeah.
So, taking a broad view, that this is how it would really happen. And I don't see any issue with the taxman because tier 4 can't sign up because they're not registered at the
They're
company's
not
house,
businesses anyway. Yeah.
yeah, which is a key requirement to LEI. So that there ends that thing. So, like you said, tier 1, tier 2, whoever can qualify for LEI is already known to the taxman. So that in itself is not an issue. I think it's for us, it's the opportunity to build the foundations for low cost compliance in the future.
I think that's just not true, Aranjay. Certainly it was the case when we were doing the initial TIPS implementation in Tanzania, that merchant reluctance to register because of tax liabilities was a major problem for them.
I mean, that's different, and that's probably true, and some of it is perceived. But I'm talking about LEI is different. Like whoever can qualify for LEI already knows the taxman.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
I definitely agree with that argument.
Yeah.
We're out of time now. Can I just give Julie the last word and then we'll close?
I think for me, the problem that you're trying to solve is not simple. In life, I've been focused on basically this for quite some time. So I feel like, yeah, benefiting from their expertise and what they see in this space could benefit us as a community, right? At the end of the day, we want to come up with a sustainable and a solution that can be used in many geographies. So yeah, that was my last point. I think just for this, we should consider partnership with them.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Julie. I think that's a good final word for the meeting. So thanks everyone for your participation today, and I will share the recording later today. Okay, thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.